Inevitable, irreversible, unprecedented. UN code red warning over climate change. They say we must act now to avoid catastrophe, with floods, fires and droughts set to become more frequent as the world keeps getting hotter.
It's no longer a problem that's only going to affect our grandchildren in the far future. We're seeing the impacts of climate change already across the world.
Also tonight, Scotland gets used to the new normal. COVID restrictions are eased, but it's masks for the foreseeable. After the heroes' welcome and the Olympic gold rush, what's the future of funding for our athletes? And Peter Kay's comeback for cancer, out of retirement to help one woman's fight for treatment.
There was so many people there, and I mean, Peter's just such a nice guy to do that for me.
This is the ITV Evening News with Charlene White.
Good evening. The extreme weather we've been seeing over the past few weeks alone and its effects, floods, fires and droughts, is likely to happen more often, causing devastation both here and in the rest of the world. That's the warning from a major UN report. It said there's no doubt that we humans have driven climate change, some of which is irreversible. But experts said there's still time to limit the damage to our planet by drastically cutting emissions. World leaders will discuss that during crucial talks in Glasgow in November, and exactly what achieving that goal might mean for us all. Our deputy political editor Anushka Asthana reports on what's been called a code red for humanity.
We've been hearing about the threat of climate change for decades, but now we can't ignore it. There's been total devastation in Germany and Belgium. Parts of California reduced to wasteland. And extreme weather in Britain too, in London and previously in Shropshire, where flooding wrecked Beverly Flynn's home.
It's a level of anxiousness that I've never known before, because it's an element that you can't control. And when you find yourself at 3 o'clock in the morning standing in water to your chest almost, and you're not sure whether it's river water or whether it's sewer water, that is quite devastating. It plays on your mind.
Like millions of others, Beverly is desperately trying to protect her home. These are the human stories behind the UN's landmark science report declaring climate change is now code red for humanity. Scientists say that since 1970, temperatures have risen faster than in any other 50-year period over the past 2,000 years. They fear that a target of keeping warming below 1.5 degrees will now be breached within 20 years, unless there is immediate, rapid and large-scale reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. One of the authors of the report says that what is needed is a 5% cut in emissions year on year.
The vaccine, just to put that into context, last year during the pandemic, a consequence of the global lockdowns, the carbon dioxide emissions were reduced temporarily by about 6%. So what we're talking about is reductions of that scale, but to be sustained over several decades.
Just think of the politics around that. Boris Johnson says he wants to get the balance of greenhouse emissions in the UK to net zero by 2050.
One of the things that charities say is there's a gap between the rhetoric and the targets, which are great, and the reality. Just to give you one example, the rate at which you're replacing gas boilers with heat pumps is something like 20 times slower than your own targets to do it.
No, you're right, and that's why we need to ramp it up. But you look at electric vehicles, 5 years ago, there was no take-up, and now we're accelerating that. And I think a similar development is going to happen in terms of heat pumps and also moving people away from gas power. We're beginning that process, and we need to drive it much more aggressively.
As ministers gear up to host a major climate summit this autumn, it's not just flooding causing concern. Coastal erosion, heat waves and even wildfires are already a reality here too. Anushka Asthana, ITV News.
Well, among the warnings in the UN report are that wildfires like those seen in southern Europe recently could be more frequent. The region has been experiencing its most extreme heat wave in decades. On the island of Evia in Greece, the flames drove people to the beaches in search of safety. They're just some of the apocalyptic scenes across the country which Ben Chapman has witnessed.
If today's report is a warning, then the scenes on Evia are as haunting as its words. Thousands of acres of lush forest reduced to lifeless limbs in days. The firefighters' job has been relentless. We watched them trying to put out hundreds of constant, tiny flare-ups spread across this island.
Why is it difficult?
We have not good roads, trucks, have problem because it's many fires.
This is day 7 of these wildfires, which have cost 2 lives and forced thousands to evacuate.
Today's report confirms what people here have been saying for many days now, that events like this are the reality of climate change, which this country is going to have to deal with a lot more.
Greece's most intense heat wave in a generation has left the ground vulnerable to the slightest spark. Christos and his friend are doing what they can to save their village, but he believes climate change is already changing their lives.
We haven't slept for 3 days because fire was coming one day from this side.
Have you ever known anything like this before, here?
Here, no, never. And I'm starting to believe that this is the way we're gonna live from now on.
This last week, fires have even threatened the outskirts of Athens. But a heat wave doesn't need flames to be deadly. And this ancient city has had temperatures into the 40s. It's become the first in Europe to appoint a dedicated heat officer who has a stark warning.
If we don't manage to really mitigate CO2 emissions globally, and if we're not brave, the politicians are not brave, maybe cities like Athens that have managed to survive for centuries might be uninhabited in the future.
In the coming years, Greece is likely to suffer this kind of devastation far more often. Not a natural disaster, but one that is almost certainly man-made, and for which it is already suffering the human cost. Ben Chapman, ITV News, Evia, Greece.
And Anushka has joined us in the studio. So Ben covered what's happening in Greece, but in terms of here, this is going to be a tough challenge for the UK, isn't it?
Yeah, we've got these huge targets, and some would say not much detail yet on how we get there. There has been money to do with moving us onto electric vehicles or getting rid of gas boilers, but there is a lot of politics behind this as well that will be difficult for Boris Johnson. On the right of the Conservative Party, backbenchers gearing up to complain that net zero costs too much. But also on the left of the party, there are some real worries. One MP I was speaking to today, worrying about the poorest constituents bearing the brunt of the cost for this, and talking about constituents who, for example, drive diesel vans. The government is very aware of this and will try to take all of that into account. And we're going to hear more and more of them arguing their case, including from Alok Sharma, for example, the cabinet minister in charge of COP26, the argument that inaction could cost us more in the long term.
OK, Anushka, thanks very much. Almost all COVID restrictions have been lifted in Scotland, including the need to socially distance. It means venues like nightclubs can reopen and large-scale events can go ahead, but you must still wear face masks in certain places. Nicola Sturgeon said it was the right moment for the changes, but a nervous one nonetheless. Here's our Scotland correspondent, Peter Smith.
Welcome to the show! It's Monday, it's raining, and there is a man juggling fire on the wet streets of Edinburgh. All of this is a sure sign normal service has resumed in Scotland this summer. Do you want to see something dangerous? This is Scotland's version of Freedom Day. And at midnight last night, the nightclubs reopened their doors for the first time in over a year.
We want to go out and meet people. So nightclubs are such a big part of that, so we're so excited to have that back, like, definitely.
On the dance floor, there is no need to wear a mask. But contrast that with this. Places of worship like this mosque are now allowed to pray shoulder to shoulder, but with face masks on.
There is still some confusion, and people do make that analogy, you know, pubs or clubs or various places like stadiums, football stadiums, for example. People are not required to wear face masks there, and they often ask us, you know, why are we requiring them? And we obviously have to clarify that it's not from us, it's from the Scottish Government at this point.
But the Scottish Government insists these rules are not contradictory. They are in fact consistent with their more cautious exit from lockdown.
We have to make different decisions for different settings to try to keep the population as a whole as safe as possible. And while we're in a much stronger position now and we can feel more optimistic, we know that we've got to treat this virus seriously and continue to do the sensible things that are required.
Scotland's new rules do allow for crowds of up to 2,000 indoors and no more social distancing.
The theatre is now open. If I could just remind you to wear your mask throughout the performance.
With masks still needed for the theatre, shops and public transport, this isn't total freedom. But with the Fringe Festival back in this summer weather, Scots can feel that bit closer to normality. Peter Smith, ITV News, Edinburgh.
More than 25,000 new coronavirus cases have been recorded in the UK in the last 24 hours, with 37 deaths reported. The number of infections brings the weekly total to over 194,000, up more than 5% on the week before. David Cameron has insisted he's done nothing wrong following a report that he made around £7 million from finance company Greensill Capital before it collapsed in March. As well as his salary, the BBC's Panorama programme alleges the former Prime Minister made millions after cashing in shares from the firm in 2019. Well, our political reporter Shihab Khan is over at Westminster for us. Shihab, can you talk us through all of this?
Absolutely. So if you sort of think back to what's been going on over the last few months or so, Greensill Capital and David Cameron have been locked in this lobbying row. And that's because when the former Prime Minister left office, he went to work part-time for this financial firm. And the accusation was that he used contacts that he had made when he was Prime Minister to try and lobby them on behalf of the company. Now, that company ended up going bankrupt. And there have been plenty of questions about how much money David Cameron made in the 2.5 years that he was a part-time advisor for that firm. Now, as you say, BBC Panorama say they've seen some documents which would suggest he made about £7 million. Now, David Cameron has been cleared of breaking any lobbying rules, but in response to the latest news, his spokesperson said that David Cameron deeply regrets that Greensill went into administration and is desperately sorry for those who have lost their jobs. As he was neither a director of the company nor involved in any lending decisions, he has no special insight into what ultimately happened. He acted in good faith at all times, and there was no wrongdoing in any of the actions he took. Now, Labour say that proves that the rules simply don't work. The fact that he was able to do this and hasn't broken any rules is a big issue.
OK, Shihab, thank you. Still to come on the ITV Evening News.
Retest, not death! Retest, not death!
Protesters plead with the PM to save Geronimo the alpaca, condemned to death over failed TB tests. And as the dust settles on the Golden Games, will BMX replace rowing in the Olympics fight for funding? Those stories and more after the break. Welcome back. The Queen has congratulated Team GB's Olympians, saying their performances in Japan were inspirational. They've now returned home, their luggage weighed down by an impressive haul of medals. It was undoubtedly a successful Games, but with thoughts now turning to the future, there are key funding decisions to be made. Our sports editor Steve Scott has been looking at what the legacy might be of Team GB's Tokyo triumphs.
The last of Britain's weary heroes arrived back in London after what their bosses described as the miracle of Tokyo, matching London 2012 for medals. They endured endless challenges beforehand and together with backroom staff endured 20,000 COVID tests while they were there. But by and large, they delivered.
I've enjoyed every single day and being in the village, everything, being part of Team GB, and just topped it off by winning gold and becoming Olympic champion is a dream come true.
Swimming was GB's best performing sport with 4 golds.
Tonight's
Cycling the next, with the Kennys breaking records along the way. Boxing had its best games for more than a century.
After a huge haul of medals in
breakthrough
Tokyo,
sports like
our
BMX and
have given so much to our athletes over the years were forced to cheer them from their sofas, but they didn't half make a noise. The weather is next, but first we'll leave you with our Olympians' greatest achievements and the homecomings.
It's been a brilliant and heartwarming story, actually.
The only concerns, perhaps, two of the best funded sports: rowing, which gets 24 million, and athletics, which gets 23.
While it can point to numerous fourth-placed finishes, rowing returned only 2 medals. Athletics, with a vast team of 75, provided 6, and no golds for the first time since '96, and a meagre 16 top 8 finishes.
But underperforming sports won't necessarily be overly punished with funding cuts for what happened in Tokyo, although the woman who distributes millions in public money won't dodge difficult decisions either.
They'll have reviewed their performances. We'll sit down and talk to them about what they think and also going forward how this might change. And then sort of funding decision rolling forward from here. So it's not as, it often sounds quite harsh of that. You've done well, you'll be fine. You've not done well, it's over. There's no way. And sport wouldn't be successful long term like that.
The remnants of Britain's Japanese journey are being packed away and will soon be in storage until Paris. Many of Team GB's young trailblazers will be there too for what the world is hoping will be a less challenging Games. These Olympics may have brought out the best in everyone involved, but most are hoping normal service will be resumed in 3 years' time. Steve Scott, ITV News, Tokyo.
Fraud officials have launched a major investigation into a care home entrepreneur after ITV News and The Guardian looked into his business dealings. Since 2013, Gavin Woodhouse raised over £80 million from amateur investors. But 2 years ago, we revealed that many of his businesses has multi-million-pound black holes. The Serious Fraud Office is now looking into his conduct. Anti-vaccine protesters have clashed with police outside the BBC's former headquarters. Television Centre in West London is now home to ITV shows, including This Morning and Lorraine. The crowd later moved on to Broadcasting House. And Vodafone has followed EE in announcing it'll reintroduce roaming charges in Europe. From next January, some customers will have to pay extra to use their phone while travelling within the EU. To Geronimo, the headline-making alpaca now, who Downing Street insist will be euthanised for testing positive for TB, despite a growing campaign to save him. More than 100,000 people have signed a petition calling for that decision to be reversed, and a small protest marched through Whitehall today. Rupert Evelyn has the latest.
Whether Geronimo has days, weeks, or even longer to live is unclear. But what seems certain is that those who want to defend this alpaca are in for the long haul.
Test, not death! Retest, not death!
In London today, there were calls for the Prime Minister to overrule the courts and DEFRA. Saving Geronimo, they argue, requires officials to listen to and act on what campaigners claim is an outdated TB testing regime.
We need to move forward from this killing your way out of trouble. This is not the Crimean War. This is not the 1890s. We need to move forward into the 21st century.
But the government aren't budging. The PM spokesman confirming he supports his minister and the alpaca must be put down. A so-called human shield is in place in Gloucestershire, preparing to prevent the ministry from the ultimate sanction on this animal. His owner is standing firm.
They're saying he's diseased. They have no evidence that he's diseased, but the test doesn't work. It's not been used properly. And they're going to use the legislation that they're hiding behind to visibly in front of world media kill a healthy animal. I mean, how is that helpful to anybody? They're going to make him a martyr.
The media might have influence, but to many the rules are robust and the alpaca should not be an exception.
At some point you have to make that decision, and that is what's happening in this case. And sometimes that decision will be wrong, but it comes down to how much do you really want to eradicate a disease.
He may have public support, but without political backing, this alpaca is seemingly living on borrowed time. Rupert Evelyn, ITV News, South Gloucestershire.
A baby who weighed about the same as an apple when she was born has been released from hospital in Singapore. Kwek Yu-Zwan was just 212 grams when she was born 4 months prematurely last June. She's believed to be the smallest baby ever born and discharged from hospital and now weighs over 6 kilograms. Oh, well done, Kwek. OK, finally. They say laughter is the best medicine, and now it's helped raise thousands for one woman's treatment. Comedian Peter Kay made a long-awaited return to the stage with 2 sold-out shows at the weekend. It was all to support student Laura Nuttall, who has brain cancer. She told our North of England reporter Hannah Miller how honoured she was by the star's good deed.
Their cheers were a sign of how much he's been missed as Peter Kay returned to the stage to raise money and, of course, a smile. The comeback gig was in aid of Laura Nuttall, who has an aggressive type of brain cancer called glioblastoma. 3 years ago, she was told she had just 1 year to live. This weekend, she was the star guest. How did it feel when you were watching it?
It was immensely incredible. I mean, Peter was hilarious, as Peter is, and the amount of people that turned up there, that waited in the queues, in the rain to get in, it was just amazing.
Pioneering immunotherapy treatment is helping Laura to lead a happier, fuller life than anyone had hoped. It isn't available on the NHS, so the family have to travel to Germany and raise tens of thousands of pounds.
Because we were lying in bed at night thinking, how on earth are we going to afford to do this again? And I was just thinking, well, we're going to have to move, we're going to have to, just trying to work out how we could afford it. And this just takes the pressure off so much.
The family also hope their efforts will help others who don't find themselves in the limelight.
If I can do something and it proves like it works, then that is advancing treatment.
And this comedian's comeback is creating smiles all round, as Peter Kay proves laughter can help you get the best medicine. Hannah Miller, ITV News.
Oh, that is all from us for now. Tom's back later with news at 10, but for me and the whole of the evening news team, enjoy your evening. Bye-bye.